this is Mrs. Betsy McRae. and-
Biddy, B-I-T-D-Y, Biddy.
Right. But you are named Elizabeth.
I'm
is that
Elizabeth, that's right.
correct? And your husband's Walter? Is that
A.
correct?
McRae Jr.
Right. And how long have you been involved with the Cummer Gardens?
I don't know. I can't, I would say, at least about 33 to 35 years. I started out, well, we had the Cummer Council, and it was very active of women, and I was involved with that. And then Ann Hicks, who I think was council, and I sort of simultaneously from our travels, we needed a fundraiser. It was times just exactly like today. We were having a hard time. The Cummer's endowment had shrunk tremendously. It was the energy, you remember that, the energy?
1975.
75, how long ago would that be from today?
34 years ago.
I got it right. I can't believe it. And we had to raise money, and oh my goodness, I wish I could think of the man who was head of the board of trustees. His son is now in our building a lot. He's a lawyer, and he takes care of a lot of people's finances and ladies that have inheritances.
So you're talking about he's in the Broadview Terrace?
You know, he comes in there, he's got clients in there. I don't think of his name. Anyhow, his father was chairman of the board, and he did not want this turned into a social place. He wanted strictly serious art. But Ann and I realized we had to have some way of raising money, and she had been to the Swan Ball in Nashville, which is a perfectly beautiful historic event in a historic garden that's been going on a lot longer than ours. And she came back really enthusiastic and said, we've got to have a ball. And I said, well, Walter and I took trips with automobile groups, and we had friends in Little Rock, and they have this wonderful thing that raises money, which is an auction. And nobody had ever done that in Jacksonville. You know, everybody does it now. They get all kinds of items donated, and then they auction them off. And the man they had and we had was from Sotheby's, I believe. And anyhow, we got really excited about that, and she asked me if I would be chairman. She was president of the council, and I said yes. And then Vicki Commander joined us as co-chairman, and the next thing was to get permission to do this. And Mr. Donahue, who is a very fine lawyer here, absolutely refused. No liquor was to be sold or given in the Cummer Gallery. That nothing.
It's kind of helpful to have that at an auction, isn't it?
Up at a party. And so a year delay. So a lot of the people on the board, Tom Omer was on the board, and Mr. Watley, I believe, was on the board. And I'm trying to think who. There's a man that was a banker. He was president of one of the banks here. He was on the board. They were all about your age and maybe older at that time. He was very receptive. And so I went to lunch with him one day and persuaded him that we really needed to raise the money. And he got it approved. So then we were off. And it was the first one. And so I wrote to Nashville, and Ann got suggestions from Nashville. And we got sort of a format and put it together. And a lot of people, Mary Jane Hubel was in charge of the auction. No, Albert Ernest's wife, Donna, was in charge of the auction. Mary Jane, I forget, Mary Jane may have been working with the auction items. But I'm trying to think of all the people that were on that original committee. Helen Lane was on it. I can't remember. But we were just kind of feeling our way through, and I thought, well, the best way is to get as many things given as possible. So we got we were having a huge buffet, and I think we decided the ideal number was 300. We didn't want more than 300. So we had tables set up out there in the garden at the upper terrace. We had a beautiful pink tent from Palm Beach. It was one of the prettiest balls we ever had, actually. And then we used the atrium. And we had to rent the tent, but we got all the food donated. I think the wine and the whiskey, and a man was down at Ponte Vedra then. It was wonderful. He was a chef, and he volunteered his services. He put it all together. It didn't take a lot because we didn't have waiters or anything. We just had it buffet, and all the florists in town took a table and decorated it. And I'm telling you, it was really gorgeous. We had crystal chandeliers in the tent, and we had all the tent poles were draped with a sheer fabric, so they looked sort of like puffs all the way down. It was all in pink, and it was gorgeous. Well, it was a success. I think the lights went off once, and Walter and Preston Haskell had to go back into the bowels of the wherever the electric system is. They got the lights back on again. The auction went fine. Nobody had ever done this before. The auction went fine, and everybody, it was just wonderful. We had a wonderful band. I can't remember who it is. We splurged on the band. But anyhow, when it was over, it was a huge success. Everybody thought it was the prettiest thing they'd ever seen. And an article in the paper came out about 3 days later and said that it had raised more money than any other charitable function, except for, I think it was what did they call the golf tournament at that time?
TPC?
TPC, is it the TPC now?
I don't know.
I don't think that was the name of it. Maybe it was a TPC. It was in its early days. It wasn't. I think it was not. It was somewhere else. And that we $1,000. It was absolutely considered astronomical.
Well, it was a lot of money.
But by today's standards, of course, it wasn't. And so it went on from there. And it was 5 years old.
How did you get involved?
Naturally, I was involved. And so I was interested. From there, I went to lots of other things I did. But the gardens were one of them. A group of 2 ladies and a doctor. I wish I had history. And they had for as long as, see what happened. This was come out and gave it as it was not appropriate for an art gallery. So they tore it all down. That the Mrs. Cummers, which is down there on the end, and that's linen fold paneling and all of that. So I became interested in the garden, and the next thing I developed, they were doing a one garden. Well, Bob Shearcliff on the board at the time, and he said, "This garden, they saved the gardens, which is absolutely beautiful. And they saved the gardens, so we have this beautiful museum with gardens, which is very on the most beautiful view in the United States, the World's Fair. So anyhow, I got involved with Garden Week, and that got a format together for that. And so, I became a member of the board just before that, when Bob said, let's change it. So I was on garden and house and garden committee, which took me time. And so that's how we got involved. And the garden didn't have any money and no budget. And we gradually got a budget, and we've gotten endowments, and we don't have enough. But we raise money now every year for the garden. With Garden Week, it raises about $100,000 a year. It's not supposed to be a huge event, but it's people get gardens, and that helps a lot towards the garden. And so that's how I got involved. My mother was a gardener. I was not interested in gardens at all, but she had a beautiful garden. And you know how you don't like the things you grew up with. I couldn't stand them. I love them now. You know, you get more sophisticated, and I learned by osmosis a lot about gardens. Of course, that was in North Carolina, not in Florida, which is a different kind of gardening. But I've learned about that. I've learned from the people that are now working in the garden. This is such a long story. I know you're getting bored.
No, ma'am.
But
we're hearing this.
this lady moved down to Ponte Vedra. She was the side, and she this tankard. Ellen Shipman's garden. Biddle Shipman was one as famous as Frederick Law Olmsted. And
Memorial Park.
his sons carried on the firm. Was the most, and in where the Garden Club of America was founded, which is one of the biggest garden clubs.
Have you seen this book?
Oh, wonderful. Is that new?
No.
Oh, wonderful. Well, about Miss Cohen there, because
it does.
Yeah, that's in her reception.
That's from the first meeting.
We've got to get that in our bookstore. We don't have. You brought it with you?
It's a mark of about a month ago. It's a rare book.
It's a book. Bought it. It's not in public. Not in.
It was.
Who autographed it? The person that wrote it.
The person who was the president of the Garden Club in 1966 was this Elliot. I can't pronounce.
I'll have to tell Bobby all about that. She's been president of the Garden Club, and she's just as interested in that as she is the cover.
This break, 1 second.
Get Mrs. Cummer here. There's the picture of Mrs. Cummer.
All the way through an iron gate.
Mrs. Cummer's house.
And then go down.
Which was where the birth of Jacksonville was.
And there's a round table there in the grave.
Say it again, please.
Oh, yeah.
Here's a picture of Mrs. Cummer's house where the Garden Club of Jacksonville was birthed by her. So this is the house that you were talking about that they tore down.
Yeah, and this right here was where her reception room was, and that's where it is now, in the new building.
even have a picture of my mother in here somewhere.
Was your mother from Jacksonville?
No, but she was a member of the garden club, and she was
Where was she from? Where did she live?
in Jacksonville.
No, where did she live?
She came from Cardwell, Missouri. Her people
Well, they came from
were
Michigan, you know.
cotton farm. She had an abiding green thumb.
Just like my mother. Did she have a garden?
She had a fernery. We had a place at Mandarin as well as a place at Avondale.
My mother was into ferns too.
Leatherleaf fern.
All kinds of ferns. This was in North Carolina.
Well, my mother commercially sold them all across the United States. But my parents took this. It was a beautiful, like 240 feet on the river, all the way back to Mandarin Road.
Excuse me.
A wonderful Garden of Eden. They planted orange groves and ferns and daylilies.
Oh, everything natural, probably.
Pretty much. And my mother was good friends with Mrs. MacArthur, who was big in the garden club.
Yes.
And
she
got
has
daylilies
children
from her.
Uh-huh.
So we had a lot of, it was a beautiful place down there. But how would you like to show us the garden?
All right, we will go on. So anyhow, this is the atrium, and I think it's one of the prettiest places in the Cumberland. I love it. And the statue there was given by Helen Lane and Jody Newton in memory of Wally, who died in her 50s and 60s. And she loved to dance, so they thought that was a wonderful statue. It's dancing. It's supposed to have this in purples and whites, and of course, like I said, it's full. It has white petunias and everything in here, and they are all gone. I can't wait to get out here and get something else in here.
Still some roses.
Uh-huh.
White roses.
Those roses, we didn't want them to be so tall, but that's what only thing we could get. And height is good in here anyhow, but it's it needs some replanting. Okay. And they were a very prominent family here. It was the dairy thing. I hope I'm right in all this history I'm giving you.
So, let me make sure I have the camera going before you start talking. Go ahead.
I don't know the history of it. I just know she loved
Who?
Miss Cummer. She loved garden ornaments and Mrs. Cummer. And so that was something that she may have had in a wall somewhere. I don't really. I think it's charming.
Go ahead. Start.
And incidentally, I told you I was on the Building and Grounds Committee, so the ad used to be, I think, just where across where the back of the columns is, and so they enlarged it, and it was after it was through the construction. I saw all these beautiful blue and white porcelains up in the storage closet. And Bob Sloggerty, who was a wonderful director, was here at the time. And I said, Bob, why do you have all those blue and white porcelains up there? And he said, well, we just don't really have a place to feature them. So I thought, I know exactly what would show them off. So I worked and designed and the shelves that the blue and white porcelains are on, and so we moved it all down here, and I think it's very effective.
You have them high, and some that are medium.
We had enough, we had to use all of it. So.
All right.
And we have some nice furniture that was original to the room, but it gets moved, and I don't know, we had a beautiful tile top wrought iron table and chairs that somebody wanted to copy and reproductions, but I don't know what. Yeah, so, Premier Galleries, this is one is named for Mr. Martin Stein by his wife, who is now Jody Newton, and this one is Herman Terry. And they're supposed to have beautiful traveling exhibitions, but I just cannot, I don't want to go in. We made of that floor to make it come out right, and we picked out the terrazza. We put the marble facings around the doors and the marble baseboards, all those things we did to enhance the galleries.
Very pretty.
And this is, and when we get on to the gallery, this was a new addition, colonnade, and you see why I love it so much. It's the Elizabeth Grimes and Walter A. McRae colonnade. And I didn't mean to be, you don't have to photograph that, but when we were raising money, I was on the fundraising committee, and one of the best things people would buy were these columns, and they could name a column for $10,000. And Walter said, God damn it, I didn't get anything but the roof, because I sold all the columns. All right, so now this is one of this oak, I wish I could tell you everything to tell you about this oak. It is unbelievable. I guess this is about 3 other oaks in the city. As beautiful as this, and it survived. I can't believe it survived all those hurricanes, but it has. It gets wonderful care. It has all of this. Looks like you're in a forest, and it's practically the only tree in the garden. But it gives the effect of being a whole lot of trees, and that tree is our other tree.
Go ahead.
It's just that I think it's a very charming spot right here. And that little boy was one of her collection, something in her collection. Strong characteristics of this garden. They have beautiful blue flowers in the late spring. And she started out with that twisted plants. I think that's what I hate to say, because I think they brought them back from Egypt, but I may be wrong.
That was Mrs. Cummer?
Uh-huh. With a few plants, and they're just magnificent. They make such a show. And Bobby Arnold is going to fuss with me if that's not the right source. Okay.
How about this?
I don't know how, I wish I knew. It was done by, let's walk over here so you can look at it. Yvette, don't try to go back up here. This is Diana of the Hunt, and she's just been back to be cleaned. And because she had to go all the way to New York because somebody climbed up there, I don't know, so quite a few years ago, and broke off half of her boat, so they had to send her back to New York to get the boat fixed. And Focus, which is a group at the beach who supports the Como, paid for that restoration. But unfortunately, they didn't ask anybody about the base. We have the original base, which was really beautiful. Everybody had a fit when they saw that because it looks like the Museum of Modern Art.
I can cut it out. I'm sorry?
I said we have the original, and we've been talking to Mr. Padroni, who is a restorer of concrete things. He is going to restore the base, and we're going to get it back on the proper one. You'll see in the book that I showed you, it shows the base, and it's charming, and it's of the right period and feeling. This does not complement the Diana at all. I mean, there's nothing in this garden that is brown marble. It should be limestone, and because all the trim on this building, a lot of it is rhinestone, limestone.
So
And
this was a gift of the
Miss,
artist.
and she's a famous artist. Her name is Anna Hyatt Huntington, and they have beautiful gardens in California. The Huntington Gardens are famous. But I really don't know the story of how she happened to give it. And see, Ms. Arnold would know that. But she is a Roman goddess of the hunt. And it's sort of nice to, since Ms. Como gave the gardens, to have this sculpture of another prominent lady. It's a beautiful statue, I think. It's the oldest garden. And it's about, well, when I first started working on it, it was 75 years old. I guess now it must be 85 or older. And so many famous people, and that's what I'm not good on. All the famous landscape architects of the time had worked in this particular garden, and one of them designed it, which is not exactly the formal design it has now. Another one was involved. One of them was, I hate to say his name because I'll get it wrong. Ocean Cole Simmons. And he believed in natural gardening, sort of like the British were doing at the time, lots of trees and natural shrubs, no particular flowers, just like green plants and shrubs and trees. And he was one of the founders of the American Society of Landscape Architects. And it says in 1910 he redesigned the garden. In 1910, from 09, what would that be?
99 years.
99 years. So that's when the garden started. Mainly he did enhancement of the riverbank.
So this was the first garden that
This
she
was
did?
the first garden.
So that's right over here?
All right, and
So basically, this is the original garden that Mrs. Kemmer had?
and this had a roof over it, which you can see how any way you can get shade in this garden, it helps. And this is a tea terrace, and that is where apparently she had the meeting that organized the garden club. Right here. This is the original tea garden.
All right, great.
Great deal of money to renovate that. It's going to be perfectly.
Wait. I want to catch what you're saying. Let me.
Yeah, get up close to them because you can see that. And those blue porcelain urns. Don't take my picture.
All right.
Was given by Mr. and Mrs. Tyree Boyer. He was a judge here in Jacksonville. And she gave it in honor of her mother, and I think it's a beautiful bench.
This is members' gates.
Yes. And this seat, let's see what they say about it. The chairs are were originally on the terrace of Arthur Cummer's parents, Wellington and Ada Cummer, and they okay. That it doesn't say. For the garden was from the Munnerlins, and they gave here it is, Jane and Wilson Munnerlin's promenade, and Mrs. Munnerlin said, Biddy, I want to do something for the Cummer, and I want it to be something ongoing that I can see through my years. She was old at that time, and I said, well, I know what would be wonderful. We need to repair the brick walks in this garden, and we'll call it the Munnerlin Promenade. So she was thrilled, and she gave us enough money to do that, and I held back about, I'd say, a fourth of it, and use this in an endowment with their name on it, and we buy flowers for the garden. And so it's been a wonderful gift, and she was one of the first big givers to the garden. We ended up by raising about $1 million for the renovation of these spaces. You couldn't come to these, you couldn't walk on this. You'd stumble and fall. The azaleas were growing over the walkway so big that you could hardly get through, and so we just had to clean out and re-establish. The parterres were here, but after Mr. Simeon, wait just a minute. Don't take this. Then along came Mr. Thomas Meehan in Philadelphia, and he was a great supplier of ornaments for the garden. So I'll show you some of the things that he supplied, but he was from Philadelphia. Everything was from the very top designer, provider of garden ornaments. The plants she ordered from Philadelphia too, many of them. And it was, everything in here was the best. This is one of the finest. So I think this is a pretty view. This is what we call the walk border. And you may want to take some
Excuse
pictures.
me, what do you call this?
The walk border.
Mm-hmm.
And we can walk across there and down there and back around.
Okay.
All right.
I think I might take my coat off.
I wouldn't. You put it somewhere there's nobody else in here. I think it would be.
That's what happened when we did Mrs. Ferguson. I had to take my coat off. All righty.
Okay.
Will you show us the rest of it?
And of course, in the spring, the thing that makes this so magnificent is the delphinium and the foxglove, because they are spectacular. But the big, we have yet to find something big and important for this summer. But it's still pretty, I think. The color scheme is pink and lavender and white. And this whole area is pink, lavender, and white. They are called the turtle planters. And you can see they're inlaid with lapis lazuli, the blue, and the turtles down there at the bottom. And she got these on her travels. She may have gotten them in Italy when she got all the things for the Italian garden. But they're very effective and beautiful, I think. Which are just absolutely, and they're pretty green. That's what's so nice about them. They're wonderful foliage. And this bench, let's see who this is named for. It's always interesting. Mr. and Mrs. Harold K. Smith. Everybody, that's how we got the garden renovated, was through selling benches and raising money. And we ended up by raising $1 million for the garden, almost. But then there were several people in the beaches that were very, very generous to us. And these parterres, at one point in the 30s, which is when there was I would say probably a more formal arrangement of the garden, and they probably then is when they put the parterres. And Mrs. Cummer was one of the first people to introduce azaleas in Jacksonville. She discovered them in Charleston, I think, and just was determined to have them in her garden. She wanted everything. She wanted the delphinium. She was one of the first people. And her sister-in-law next door, unbeknownst to her, was also a gardener, was raising these beautiful delphinium. Didn't tell Mrs. Cummer till they went full bloom, and then she invited Mrs. Cummer over to see her delphinium. And that was always a funny story. So immediately Miss Cummer started having delphinium in this garden. And many of the things, she loved Easter lilies. She had a lot of lilies in here, Easter lilies. And of course the agapanthus, which is so distinctive. But this is where she put her azaleas, also down the length of that garden. Huge azaleas. We had to dig them up and bring them back. Replace some of them. Well, they were mostly pink, and some of them were white. Pink and fuchsia, I would say. These are mainly pink in here. She liked pink. And, well, we'll get to that part later. Ellen Biddle Shipman came into her life in about 31 and made a big difference in this garden. I'll tell you that story in a minute. But she was the famous women. Let's see what it says here. In 1920, they began to seriously acquire garden ornaments, such as bird baths, wall plaques, urns, and statuary that they placed in the English garden and elsewhere. That's one of the things that makes this garden so special, is the statuary. It's, period, and it's all original. It's not reproductions. And I love every single piece of it. And I found pieces in all kinds of, some of them were in storage and some of them were in inconspicuous places. And we added the benches. There was no place to sit in here. So that's how we raised money, and that's how we provided some seating. This, I forget, that was down there somewhere, but it makes a beautiful ending for this walkway. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things. They all look awfully pretty, I think. So these huge pink roses, we're replacing them this fall because they've been here for about 8 or 9 years, and we have to start fresh.
What happens if you do not start afresh?
Well, they just get smaller, and the flowers get smaller, and you have to cut them way back, and then they get, sort of out of scale. So they're called first kiss, and they're great big. See how small they are. If you'll see in those pictures,
Are they going back to the wild states, you think?
Oh, I don't know that. I don't know
Because
that.
I'm sure they're all cultivated, but the wild roses are much
Small.
much smaller
And
and beautiful.
These little pink ones are fabulous. They bloom almost all year round, and they fill in the front, and they never get out of scale. And then this is our wonderful shady spot. And I'll get into this a little bit more when we get around to the other side.
What kind of vine is this?
Wisteria. And we just, I was determined to make it bloom, and you have to trim it back. And last year, I said I would help them pay for trimming the vine back. Looks like it's right back where it was. But we're hoping this spring it will be more profuse. It has a tendency to bloom underneath instead of, we have pictures of it when it was just covered. But it's another plant that is very independent. You never know when wisteria is going to bloom and when it won't.
Mrs. McRae, do you have gardeners on staff, or do you
We
hire outside help?
You'd be we have 3 ladies that work on Mondays, and we have Les. Should I put his last name? Don't put that in. Les, who is wonderful. He works here through the week, but he everything's cut back to a minimum. We used to have 2 people in here, now we're down to 1. I think his hours are less. He leaves about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. It's a big thing to take care of. But we have some independent contractors that come in and weed and help plant when we change seasons, and to do the myriad small tasks. But he's a supervisor, and he works just as hard as they do. You can see all just the trimming of the hedges is an enormous job. Probably the $1 million view of the river.
I agree with that.
And that's why we don't want the river.
You want the garden to be what?
A place of repose and quiet and beauty.
Start the whole thing. The garden.
You want the garden to be a place of repose and calm and beauty. It's not supposed to be an activity center. So many ways to say that. And Ms. Comer always said, I'll tell you when we get over to the that other pergola over there, I'll tell you what she said about it. Walk around and see the garden.
You have little surprises, like a little.
Yeah, the rabbits and. But I see when I walk around, I see so many things that need to be done. This is supposed to be yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and it blooms with blue and white flowers, and it's supposed to be a spalier, and flat and controlled, but it's not. Mr. Meehan, did I mention him? Yes, of Philadelphia, was the second person, I guess, to be involved. And so the centerpiece of the English garden was the large wisteria arbor. She originally called it a wisteria garden, but in later years, when she became so entranced and interested in azaleas, it became the English garden.
Are azaleas originally from England?
Japan. They were introduced, I don't know where they were first. I think Charleston. I have a feeling that's one of the first places they were introduced. Maybe up in New Jersey and some of those beautiful.
Well, they're all over the South now.
Yeah, I know it. But she gets trying to get them in this office there, which I think is much prettier than all that she put there. But it's what's so wonderful is the axis in this garden. As you can see, it goes straight down like this and straight like that, and everything is tied together by these two axes. That's such an important element in all gardens. So
how many fountains are there in the garden?
3, I think. The big one in the Italian garden, and this is where the Olmsted firm became involved in the garden. Mrs. Comer was working on the Memorial Park at that time. It was about 1924. And she, of course, like I said, wanted the best. And so she was the one, of course, all the committee, I don't know who the rest of the people, local leading citizens were involved with the park. But she became sort of the director of the planting. She just sort of the details, she became the important person. And so she came to know the man who came down to work on the garden. It wasn't an Olmsted, it was a member of his firm, and I wish I could find his name, because he was, anyhow, she said she had loved to hear the dripping of the water and the birds in the garden, and that's what when I said how important it was to not have the confusion and noise and invasion of the river walk. She loved the sounds of the garden, and that was part of the experience of the garden. So anyhow, Olmsted wanted her to take, at that time, they were in the lumber business, and this pergola down here, the wisteria pergola, had cypress posts, and it was kind of clumsy looking and informal, and she was getting more formal. She always she didn't want it over the top elegant. She just wanted it beautiful with fine things, but not ostentatious. She absolutely didn't want it ostentatious. And he wanted to put columns like this, replace the cypress. But I don't know at what point, but at that time, I think they replaced them with brick. And she wanted him to find a beautiful fountain for her. Well, he came up with a lot of elaborate fountains. And we have her letters saying she really did not care for those suggestions. He also said it would be more attractive if you had an arbor over it and made it a cool spot. So she agreed with that. But she found this, I think she found this in Philadelphia at that same, it was designed by William Mercer. William Mercer is a famous designer of garden ornaments. And she found this, I think, in Philadelphia and liked it a lot better than what Olmsted had suggested. But I think they suggested these columns and the pergola, which she did do, and I think it's one of the most charming places in the garden because it's cool and you can hear the water, and it's just another corner. I mean, this is one of the many special areas that make it distinctive. You could stop for a minute. Comers, the family, the senior family, not these Comers, but the senior family, who had the big house up on Riverside Avenue, and then there was this house on one side and the other Comer family on the other side, and Arthur and Nina Comer was this side, and the other side, right next door, was Waldo and Clara, and they tore down the original family home, and then each one of them got more property to expand their gardens, and so that was over where the Italian garden was. I think was the garage and some service area, and all along the river was trees and just riverbank. So we don't know this exact sequence, but at that time Ellen Biddle Shipman was the leading woman landscape designer, and she always wanted the best. So somehow she knew of her and got her down to show her new space. And we don't know whether she went to Italy first or Ellen Biddle Shipman went, or whether Ellen Biddle Shipman suggested that she go or she suggested Ellen Biddle Shipman go. But they both went to Villa Gambria, which is a perfectly beautiful garden that is almost identical to the Italian garden. Mrs. Comer saw it and she wanted to duplicate it.
That's the new garden.
The new Italian garden.
And we will see
And
that garden the next time, right?
We call it the Shipman Garden.
And we're going to see that another time?
Yes.
Can you tell me that?
And we'll talk about that on your next visit.
Thank you.
And Mrs. Shipman, and so we just knew it was Italian garden, and that Mrs. Comer had gone to Italy and seen the Villa Gambria and thought it was absolutely beautiful. It had a beautiful view of the mountains of Italy. It didn't have the river, but it had that pergola, the arched pergola, and she just knew that was the perfect thing to back up to the river and look through the arches. And it would balance this. It made a perfect bookend for this pergola. So I don't know whether that was Ellen Biddle Shipman's suggestion or Mrs. Comer, but Miss Comer had very strong ideas about gardens, and so probably when she saw it, she wanted it. That was probably the principal feature of that garden that she loved. So anyhow, Ellen Biddle Shipman, we just called it the Shipman Gardens. I mean, we called it the Italian Gardens. We didn't know anything about Ellen Biddle Shipman. This was about 8 or 9 years ago. And Carolyn Lindsay, who moved to Ponte Vedra, was the president of the American Horticulture Society at one time. And she saw the book in the bookstore, I think, by Judith Tankard, about Ellen Biddle Shipman Gardens. She bought the book, and she thought, I'm going to see if there are any gardens in Florida that were designed by Ellen Biddle Shipman. So she flipped to the back of the book, and there it said, the Comer Garden in Jacksonville, Florida, Arthur and Nina Comer Garden. So she called, I think she may have called me or somebody. Anyhow, I talked to her on the phone, and she said, do you all know that you have a garden that's completely like Ellen Biddle Shipman laid it out, and there are hardly any left in the country. you have a treasure. And we said, no, Miss Cummer never mentioned it. It's not in any of her records. We don't know that. So she wrote up to Boston, I guess, and got the plans, all the plans for the garden. Every drawing, there must be 12 or 15 pages of her design for that garden. Mrs. Cummer never mentioned it. Nobody ever knew it. We finally decided, through bits and pieces from some of the still living members at that time, that she got mad, possibly because the bill was so high. I don't know if it was $12,000 or whatever it was, and she wasn't going to pay it. And Mr. Cummer ended by paying it, and Mrs. Cummer put the garden in according to those beautiful plans, with some changes. I mean, it's interesting to follow the development, because they changed the ideas, and the fountain was placed at one end and then at the other end. But I almost think she must have gone after those plans were drawn, because she came back with so many beautiful ornaments and had places for them in the Italian garden. And that's where the most beautiful ornaments are. So we suddenly had not only an Olmsted contribution, we had Ellen Biddle Shipman, we had the St. Johns River, and then we have over there that we're now developing, raising money for, the other Cummer Garden, which was worked on by another member of the Olmsted firm. So we have two of the leading designers in that era's garden still preserved just the way they were laid out originally. One of them almost 100 years old, and then this one, which goes back to Italian one, which goes back to 1931.
That's good. Go.
Well, thank you very much for showing us the English garden, and we look forward to doing the Italian garden with you next month.
All right, and we will do the putting green, which is there in the center, and was the first, one of the first private putting greens in Florida. So there's lots more stories.
Well, great. We're looking forward to it.
And cut.
think it's
funny.
very
I'm glad we
charming.
have it now, because it's just so funny. So I'm afraid this is gonna be funny too.
I think it's
You'll
gonna be
see, but
wonderful.
when we come back, I'll let Bobby do the talking.
But we'll hopefully have the video up in several weeks, and you can see
Yeah,
it.
you might, add that you're gonna put it on tape, and I'd love to, there's no way you can convert that to something you can show on a screen.
Yes, ma'am, I can do that.
That's what I think we could
I'll
have.
do that for you.
I'd love to have the garden committee
I can put
see
it on
it.
DVD.
And it would be wonderful in connection with this rain on us.
It was funny. I thought I had a picture of that Diana